to all of our partners. Today we are especially thanking Sam Headshots because he is hosting Catherine, who's at his studio right now with the beautiful blue lights behind her. Our other partners are Vote Like a Girl, Rowan Tree, the Impact Center, Sword Community, Barnes Alley, Virginia's List, Resisterhood, Forward. And most importantly, we could not be doing this event without all the supporters in the grassroots community who backed us the day we said we were going to go virtual and said, we are with you. Before we get started, we're going to hear a word from one of our wonderful sponsors.
Hi, I'm Henrico County Commonwealth's Attorney Shannon Taylor, and I believe Virginia needs paid leave and paid sick days because it helps us build a stronger economy and builds financial resiliency for working families. I support paid leave because too many hardworking Virginians are being forced to make the choice between caring for their family or earning enough money to put food on the table. This is wrong and an unfathomable for hardworking Virginians. Too many don't have the resources to care for their families when someone gets sick or welcomes a new child, and especially so during a national health crisis like COVID-19. Paid leave would allow working people to care for their loved ones without having to stress about their finances. Our state is a leader in economic growth and job creation, and passing paid leave and paid sick days will honor the hard work of working people and their families. Virginia has earned this. I am proud to stand in support of this mission and all of the incredible organizers, activists, and community leaders who are on the ground and doing the work. Stay safe and be well.
Thank you. And Catherine, it's on to you.
All right. Well, welcome. It's great to see everybody in the room. My name is Catherine White. I'm Program Director at Network Nova, and I'm co-founder of Network Nova also. Joining me is Krista Jones, founder of Vote Lead Impact, and Krista is also on the Women's Summit program team. So great. Krista's here in the room with us. We will be moderating today's session. And Rosemarie Savino, thank you, Rosemarie, for being here. You will be handling the chat and the Q&A. So if anybody has something great to say, put it in the chat. We will be looking at that. And thank you, Sam, again for hosting me. Look at my great background. It reminds me of the stage from last year.
Absolutely.
So, right? Welcome to day 3 of the Women's Summit Experience. Today's session is aptly titled Primary Day Power Lunch of the Women's Summit Experience. So the letter P in experience is for politics and primaries. And also for powerhouse women. And today we have 2 in the room. We have Neera Tanden. Welcome, Neera.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, she's president and CEO of the Center for American Progress and the CEO of the Center of American Progress Action Fund, where she focuses on how both organizations can fulfill their mission to expand opportunity for all Americans. Neera has also served with both the Obama and the Clinton administration, as well as on presidential campaigns. She has also been a special guest speaker at 2 prior Women's Summit. You were at last year's Badass Breakfast. So awesome. And also, another powerhouse is Gaby Goldstein, co-founder and political director of Sister District. For those who are new to action, Sister District Project works to build Democratic majorities in state legislatures and fosters progressive policy transfers between states. Gaby's role as political director is to define and execute Sister District's national political strategy. She does the analyzing for all the race targeting, oversees and implements the candidate endorsement process, and maintains an ongoing oversight of the organization's field and candidate services program. So let me kick this off with my good friend Krista, and she will get started with some questions to Neera, and then we will go to Gaby, and then hopefully we'll have some time for some Q&A. And so let's get this experience started. Take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. Neera, I am so excited to talk to you about a part of everyday life that everyone is dealing with in terms of, the protests and COVID. Mm-hmm. We're really starting to focus on what's going to happen next in November. And obviously through your role, you've been very outspoken in terms of the current state of affairs and how we're going to make it over the hump in November. So when we're thinking about everything that's going on, especially with George Floyd, it really was like a boiling point was met, and it boiled over into the streets for night's end. We've seen anti-racist protests, marches, and the beginning, really not the beginning, but more of a resurgence of a dialogue on race in our country. But we've also seen Trump double down on his race baiting. Neera, what are your thoughts on all of these current events? And can you give us a big picture national view of the Trump administration's response and failure to lead here at home and across the globe during both of these crises?
Thanks, Krista. Thanks for the fantastic question. And I first want to just say that I am so thrilled to be here virtually with all of you. I really think of the NOVA Women's Summit and the Women's Summit in general in Virginia and the way women are organizing in Virginia as a national model. I think that women are leading the resistance and have led the resistance to Trump. And while I can't see you all, I know we'll get really great questions, but this organization is really demonstrating how to organize in the Trump era. And I think it really goes to your question, which is we're really in the middle of what I see as kind of two pandemics. One is the virus, a traditional pandemic, but we're also seeing with the protests, with the murder of George Floyd and the resulting protests, that the country recognizes that there are systemic challenges we have to deal with. And I honestly think that the Trump administration's response has in doubling down on racism, in basically coming on the side of police brutality and lawlessness, has galvanized a multiracial coalition. And I think this is a unique moment, which is you're seeing a broad multiracial coalition made up of men and women, young and old. And attitudes are shifting across the board in response to this large scale movement for change. And what I think is so important is that you're seeing women of color, but white women organizing for justice, flooding the streets, putting up, protesting in all corners of Virginia, not just in Richmond, not just in Northern Virginia, but in all corners. And a few weeks ago, the New York Times showed a map of where all the protests have been, and they are all throughout the country. And that is what gives me hope. What gives me hope is that we have this administration which has fueled the flames of our worst instincts, of the worst instincts amongst Americans, which is to hate people for their differences. But that effort has created a counter response in the country. We saw it first with the Women's March, the largest protest in history, in the history of the United States. And now we have the largest protests for Black rights in the history of the country, in every corner of the country. And I think that says that a majority is forming to reject this hatred. And I just applaud the women in this room who have been organizing and giving people the muscle tissue to use, their voice to protest, and ultimately, over the next 4.5 months, build the muscle tissue to vote. And I hope we will have, yes, great t-shirt. When we vote, we win. And over the next 4.5 months, my hope is that you'll see this voice on the streets move into the ballot box. And my hope is we'll have the largest electoral outcome of my lifetime.
And I'm really glad you brought up those excellent points. I know for me, when I talk to other Black women, they say, we are tired. We are tired of taking on this struggle, this race issue. How did we get to the point where we are having to kind of lead on race issues when we're the ones who are being oppressed. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you saying that. And in terms of being all over, my dad lives in a suburban residential neighborhood in Burke, Virginia. And he was calling me and he was like, oh my God, there's protesters, and they're mainly white, marching down the street with Black Lives Matter signs. So it is in the middle of the day. So it's just like everywhere. So you're right. This is just a pivotal moment. And I'm glad to see so much energy behind that. And as we kind of translate that into the decisions that are being made on the national political scene, particularly in terms of the Democratic Party and what we're hoping will happen in November, Biden is obviously going through the process of selecting his VP. Do you believe that the Democratic Party, with VP Biden as its nominee, can leverage the power of both of these movements, so the movement of women and people of color, to win in 2020? And what do you think that strategy looks like? And, how important do you think it is that the VP choice be a person of color, a woman of color?
Well, my own personal view, and this is a tough call because there are fantastic women. I'm a huge Kamala Harris fan. I'm a huge Elizabeth Warren fan. But my view in 2016 and my view today is that the Democratic Party is in stark contrast to the Republican Party. The Democratic Party is a diverse party. Diversity is at the core of the party. And so, my predilection is that the ticket reflect that diversity. And it will definitely reflect that diversity with women, with a woman candidate, but I think we have to really reflect the broad diversity of the coalition. And so that is my personal view. But I also, it pains me a little because I am a big Elizabeth Warren fan, but I do think we should recognize that there are many women of color who would be great vice presidents and ultimately great presidents. And to me, almost the response to the Trump era needs to be, at least part of the response to the Trump era needs to be that we reject this in all our forms and we celebrate the diversity of our broad coalition. But I also, so I think we have to all work at it. And I think the most optimistic thing over the last several years has been the increased turnout of women and people of color. And we saw in 2018, an historic election, we saw in 2018, women turn out at large levels and people of color and young people. And I think we've seen even in the primaries, one of the most hopeful signs of the primaries is surge of voters, suburban voters, women. People see what's at stake. Now, there's a lot of work to do. We need to make sure that in November, people of color, Latinos, African Americans, Asians, we also need to make sure young people are mobilized. Young people have made a decision about Trump, but the question is whether they're going to vote. Now, I got to say, for me, I'm just to be, I always keep it real here. I want to kill myself when I hear people like, what's the difference? There were two old white guys. I was like, well, one of these old white guys is basically doing nothing to save your life and in part taking policies that are essentially leading to deaths of Americans during a pandemic. No national plan, basically opposing testing. It's insane. And another one wants to make your life better. So I kind of see it as a big, I don't see it as that tough a choice of whether to vote. But the strategy of the Republican Party has always been, or has been over the last decade, they don't like a fair election because that's how they lose power. So their goal is if they want to choose the voters, they don't want the voters to choose them, they want to choose the voters. So we are going to have massive suppression and we're going to have to do new things, like get people to vote early vote, get people to vote absentee who've never voted absentee. Yes, exactly. So we're going to have to do a lot of new things in this election. But what I'm excited about is we have an army of people who want to take their democracy back and are willing to engage on the streets to do it.
Absolutely. And when you talk about, making sure people are clear about the differences between these two candidates, really for a long time, the Republicans have not seemed very concerned with passing policy, as we have, 400 bills sitting on McConnell's desk.
Mm-hmm.
McConnell really seems to be focused on filling judgeships, and Trump is hell-bent on destroying anything Obama did and dismantling democracy. The atmosphere is really just chaotic, and like you said, people are suffering. Nothing seems to be getting done. Can you talk maybe more about, when you talked about voting, really connecting those dots between what's going on, all of the issues that are going on in our country, and making sure people on the ground really understand that?
Yeah, so let me just take an issue that the Congress is debating right now, right? Police accountability and police reform. The murder of George Floyd captured the national attention, but we should recognize that we have had what feels like countless names. These are, going back years. And the murder of George Floyd was captured on video, and the almost 9 minutes are painful to watch, the murder of another human being on video. But we have case after case after case. And Sandra Bland, we have all these cases of police brutality, and also a justice system with Trayvon Martin and others that seems like we can just excuse or not care about the lives of Black people. And so that is what's fueled this protest. And let's recognize what's happening, right? Right now, the House has passed a bill, or I think it's passing a bill, I forget the days, which has real reform in it. Is it a perfect bill? No, but it has police accountability in it, meaning police who violate the rights of anybody, but of Black people, will be held accountable. It ends qualified immunity, which has given police essentially a carte blanche to violate the civil rights, harm African Americans and other people. Ending qualified immunity is something that no one was talking about just a few years ago, but it's passing the House of Representatives. Now, let's look at what the Senate is talking about, right? Mitch McConnell has drafted a bill with Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, the lone African American Republican in the Senate. And that bill studies every issue. Doesn't end qualified immunity. It doesn't even end chokeholds. No country has chokeholds. Countries don't allow police to just do chokeholds on their citizens because it often leads to death. So it doesn't ban chokeholds. It essentially studies the problem. It is essentially a way for the Republicans to mouth that they're doing something and never actually make any change. And to me, this is just a good example of right in the middle of a national crisis and protests. And the truth is, there are protests in every state. So there are protests in Republican states, and their answer is to do nothing. And I think this tells us, if you want to end qualified immunity, if you want to have a policing system that treats the lives of Black people like the lives of anyone else, that's on the ballot in November. Just like your healthcare is on the ballot, just like our democracy is on the ballot, just like the treatment of immigrants is on the ballot, all of our lives are on the ballot. But we are given evidence every day that what Republicans want to do is either nothing or make our problems worse. And if the last 3 years haven't convinced you that the president and the Congress has something to do with your life, then you got to listen to your friends and family more.
True.
Absolutely. And just one last question as we wrap up. I'd like to go back to voting again. We did obviously talk about it a few minutes ago, but we had a great session on Sunday in terms of talking to grassroots advocates across the nation and just the work we've been doing on the ground. And I'm really, I would like to hear your take more on people of color and younger people in particular. Do you have any suggestions for how we reach them in particular, any issues that might resonate with them as well?
Yeah, I think it's really, really important that we don't talk to any community, but particularly young people, communities of color, or particularly, and this is a really important group to turn out in this election, younger people of color. So younger people of color did not come out in the primaries at a particularly high rate, and we really need them to come out in the election if we want to have a broad-based coalition to defeat Trump. And so I think it is central. I think a lot of times we tend to think, what is it that I would like to hear, and talk to young people about that, or younger communities of color. But I think our discussion here is a really important one. The protests have been fueled. The protests for the civil rights of Black people and the treatment of Black people have been fueled by a multiracial coalition of young people. It's not that they're not the only ones protesting. It's multi-generational, but it has been fueled by that coalition. And so I think this discussion today around how do we change policing in our country to both protect people, I think this is a really important point. What we're saying about policing is, if you make the police part of the community, serving the community, and not kind of the jail wardens of a community, you actually reduce crime and make everyone safer. And so having this conversation and really talking about how we can make real change in criminal justice, in voting, I think that is central to actually telling people, you know, it does matter who the president of the United States is. And most importantly, it matters who your mayor is, and who your city council is, and who your DA is, and who's making the budget decision for your police. If you want to lower the footprint of the police and make sure you have more mental health counselors, you got to vote in November in your local elections and for president.
Absolutely.
It's the whole suite of elections. And too often, I mean, I think this is really changing. People are focusing more on local elections, which the right has done very effectively. And I hope, I mean, you know, just honestly, this has been a horrifying 3 years. And whenever you think it's like reached bottom, like miraculously, he finds a new way to make it worse. But if there's one silver lining about this, I am hoping we will have a generation of activists who will become a generation of leaders, who will become, you know, the people who transform our country for years to come out of this thing. Just like the Vietnam War created leaders for a generation, the Civil Rights Movement created leaders for a generation. My hope is that we'll see that leadership come forward.
Absolutely. Great points, Neera. Thank you so much. Now let's hear from our next guest, Gaby Goldstein of Sister District.
Hey, okay, welcome. Neera, thank you so much. And if you can stick around, you're welcome to. I know that, you know, if you have to leave, don't worry about it. We love to have you at the end for some question and answer and some talk maybe between you and Gaby even. I'd like to launch our first poll. Robin, if you could put that slide up, and please put that in the chat. And since today is primary day in Virginia, we hope you all voted. And if you're from another state, Kentucky's voting today. I think there's a couple primaries that are going on. So let us know how you will be casting your vote. If it's in person, curbside, we're interested how you voted today and where you're from even. So we know like how your primary's been handled. And then we'll be able to, Rosemarie will be looking at all that. Maybe she can have a few comments at the end about how people are doing in this vote. So welcome, Gaby.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. So yes, so I'm so glad you're here, because Sister District is, I wanted to follow up the second piece of the big national look with some grassroots talk, because like we talked about in the first part with Neera, it is all about voting and being able to vote. And what Sister District is good at is that. And also, you know, we got to know you back in 2017. So I'd like to just open it up with some general, a lot of people may not know Sister District in this room. So please tell us about Sister District, its history, its mission. That would be great to start.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first off, I want to thank Network Nova so much and the Women's Summit for organizing virtually. I love the tenacity here and the creativity to bring us all together online, and for pulling this panel together. Virginia is such a shining light for activism, particularly at the state and local levels. And so it's so great to be with you, and wonderful to speak alongside Neera, whose longstanding commitment to democratic policies and candidates I so admire. So I'm Gaby. I'm one of our co-founders here at Sister District, and I like to say that Sister District is a postmodern love story. My co-founders and I met on a Facebook group thread. None of us came from electoral politics. 4 of the 5 of us are lawyers, including myself, 2 public defenders, and I'm a bioethicist by training. And none of us were looking to upend our lives, but of course, none of us were looking to have our lives upended in 2016. And its aftermath changed our lives. We hatched this idea on a Facebook group, which was, look at all the money that's being spent on Senate races, on congressional races, tens of millions of dollars on primaries in California, in very safe Democratic seats. What is going on? Yet we're stuck in this gridlock in Washington. There's the rampant gerrymandering that we see. What were Democrats missing? What had we overlooked here? Was there something that we could do? And so we came to understand very quickly the power of state legislatures and what an overlooked venue of power state legislatures have been for Democrats for decades. I like to say Democrats are tardy to the party when it comes to understanding the value and the importance of state legislatures. Republicans have been at this game for years. As y'all know, in Virginia, right, weaponizing state legislatures and state policy for their own regressive goals. And so, we really came to see that there were a bunch of really good reasons to spend some time and some money working on flipping state legislatures. First of all, it is a policy pipeline. State policy gets around, and Republicans and their nefarious but strategically brilliant organizations like ALEC have just been masterful at using state policies and trading them around and spreading them like a virus. But we could do that too, not like a virus, but really like use state policy as a democratic tool. Leadership pipeline. Half of all presidents started in their state legislature, including Barack Obama. Half of all members of Congress start in their state legislature. And as y'all probably know, we lost about 1,000 state legislative seats during Obama's 8 years. That's our farm team. That's our bench. So really, we need to spend some time rebuilding that leadership pipeline. And of course, state legislatures remain vital to fair districting and fighting back against gerrymandering and fighting for voting rights. Increasingly, with the Supreme Court taking its sort of rightward lurch and gutting the Voting Rights Act and so forth, state law controls so much of voting rights, and voting laws are state laws. And voter suppression tactics are very typically state law, creatures of state or local law. So we saw some really important reasons to focus on state legislatures. We saw a gap in organizing capacity, in resources, going specifically to Democrats running for state legislature. And we saw these huge gaps in the fundraising where Dems would be outraised by their Republicans at the state legislative level by 2 or 3 or 4 times, routinely outspent by really wide margins. And we also came to see that there could be a tremendous return on investment for our volunteer hour and our volunteer dollar at these smaller races that had these huge outsized impacts. So the idea was, and the name Sister District comes from the idea of a sister city, what if we were able to harness the energy and the resources from folks in one place and direct those resources and that energy towards strategic, winnable state legislative races somewhere else where we could make a big impact in terms of field support and in terms of small grassroots dollars fundraising. And so that really was the goal and the mission here, to build and maintain progressive power through Democratic majorities in state legislatures across the country. So since we started as an idea on a Facebook thread, we've grown now to more than 45,000 volunteers across the country, organized into about 125 active teams and affiliates. And we've supported 75 candidates and had 51 wins. We've raised over $2.3 million in small grassroots dollars directly for those candidates, touched more than 2 million voters through doors and calls and texts and postcards. And, I'm really proud to say that our candidates who we supported flipped the state senates and delivered Democratic trifectas in Washington State and Colorado. Our candidates flipped both chambers and delivered a trifecta in Virginia, of course, over two cycles. Our candidates have broken Republican supermajorities in the Pennsylvania and Michigan Senates. And we've flipped dozens of seats at the state house and state senate levels in other states as well, including Arizona and Florida. So that's a little bit about our history. I just wanted to say one other thing and acknowledge what's happening right now, and just piggybacking on Neera's comments, acknowledge what's happening across the country as folks protest the execution of Black people in this country during a pandemic, during a public health crisis in which federal leadership is completely absent and states are really having to forge their own paths. And, our organization has released public statements in support of Black lives and condemning all acts that marginalize and endanger Black people, including state-sanctioned violence. And we're continuing our work to elect progressive and diverse candidates to state legislatures, which is one of the best ways that we know to bring meaningful change. And Stacey Abrams had a really, really great op-ed a couple of weeks ago acknowledging that voting may seem really inadequate right now. But she makes this case, I think, really, really well, that voting is a step in a long and complex process, and she calls it, quote, tedious but vital. And she makes this analogy that you can have a car with all the bells and whistles, but if it doesn't have wheels, you can't move forward. And it's the same here. You can't enact policies if you don't have the votes. And really, so much policy in public health and in criminal justice and policing is set at the state level. On Friday, which was Juneteenth, Jared Polis in Colorado signed into law a sweeping policing reform bill that Leslie Herod and others in Colorado wrote and then passed through both chambers and was signed into law, that ends qualified immunity and that establishes some real strict standards in Colorado. That's a matter of state law. Yes, it's nice that the federal government might have bills on McConnell's table and all the rest, but the real rubber hits the road at the state level.
Yes.
And that's what's on the ballot this year as well, are these state legislative races. This is our last chance before redistricting, but it's also this pivotal moment in so many areas of policy that we care about, including policing. When we started this organization, I don't think we could have foreseen how important state legislatures would become just even in these few years. We knew it was overlooked, but no one could have expected this pandemic, where every day we see the importance of state policy, much more important than federal policy in so many ways. And we see it at the police in terms of policing and justice reform, which is very, very largely state and local policy. So we remain committed to this idea that a fair and democratic future for this country depends on building progressive power at the state level.
Yes, and the power, and who knew that federalism would be so sexy, right? This idea, but it is. And what's great about your story of Sister District, it's so similar to a lot of the groups that are here probably in the chat. Network Nova got started the same way, and we saw that we had to make change really in elections, and we looked around and we saw the Democratic Party just really took their eyes off the ball of what was happening across the states. And we joined with you in 2017, and then in 2019 you guys were right alongside us here fighting in Virginia, supported a lot of the candidates, and we brought that victory, that trifecta. But we still know that, we have to get better, and we're all awoke now to this idea of this state power. And so with that said, in the 2020 election, I'm really interested in the strategy, because I think we all know what we're saying here is that we need to vote. We all know all the importance of why we need to vote. I think the biggest concern I'm hearing from all of my activist friends and people is, will we be able to vote. And then also different ways to get the vote out that could be more creative. And I know in the chat, some people are calling out postcards. Some of us are saying, let's just stop this with this persuasion of voters. If you're not, like Neera said, if you're not persuaded now, it is all about voting, energizing the youth, people of color to understand that voting does bring a change, and the Democratic Party has to be that voice and that message, right? So in your opinion, I'm interested to see what you guys are brewing up there about with sister districts, so people in this chat can join you in that journey. And also this idea that, Biden is leading nationally, right? But this is a state by state fight, and each state is different. And so it's educating. I think we have to, I'll just toss it back to you, but I think this is interesting challenge that we have to get into each state, look at how they're voting. Like Kentucky today is having a primary, and look, they had what, 200, how many polling places open? A couple? So this is a suppression. So what is your view of this state to state fight? And really, I feel like that's really on the table, what's going to deliver that victory in November.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so much here. One thing I just want to say up at the top is this issue about persuasion. And so, what I would add to the conversation is Ibram Kendi, who is a scholar on race and on civic engagement and all the rest, really encourages folks to stop thinking about persuasion as trying to persuade people to vote not Republican, right? And to instead think of persuasion as we need to persuade people who agree with us to actually vote. And this is an argument that I think is very important. When we talk about persuasion, we cannot just be talking about, say, white Trump voters, trying to persuade them to vote for us, right? To vote for Democratic candidates. Fine, that's fine. I think we all agree, or we may, there's a certain universe of those people that, we're not really going to spend a ton of time on this year. But persuasion also has to mean persuading people of color, persuading Black people, persuading young people who agree with us ideologically, but may not agree that voting matters at all, to actually get out and vote. And that's the persuasion I care about. And we all need to care about that persuasion a lot, because no one deserves, Joe Biden, no one deserves a vote, right? We have to persuade people who do agree with us ideologically that their vote matters and that voting matters. And so I just wanted to make that distinction. I think it's just important.
I want to say that's a really important distinction. And I think I just want to bring something up and interject. What I've heard about the disinformation campaign will be targeting youth voters and also people of color with that message that why vote for Democrats. And so I think in this chat, and these organizations here have to understand we need to reach those voters and do that persuasion, because the Democratic Party, they're going to say doesn't deliver, doesn't really care for you. This is going to be where the trolls and this disinformation campaign is. So I think this is really important. And what you're saying is that we have to really live our values, reach these voters and convince them that this is the way. But they're going to be being targeted, the voting, they shouldn't vote for.
Yeah, and also a lot of, I know Neera has something else to say as well. A lot of times campaigns do not reach out to the voters that I'm talking about that we need to persuade. And the way that works, that mechanism, is that they are left off the universe in campaign talk of people that we reach out to. So people who may have very high support scores in the parlance of field, right? People who agree with the Democratic Party but have low propensity scores or turnout scores. Those people are often not talked to at all by campaigns. And often that's a matter of resource constraint, especially at the state legislative level or local level, right? I mean, we're just trying to get as many people to turn out. That to me is part of the answer here, is making sure that we are talking to and expanding our universes to the people who have high support scores and low turnout scores and not leaving them out of the conversation. That needs to be part of our persuasion universe. Neera, I think you might have something that you wanted to add.
Yeah, I want to say I agree with this, but I really think that there is too much, in my view, and I defer to other experts here, but in my view, it seems to me there's too much of a debate in the party about this versus that. And the beauty, so I 1,000% agree with Gaby that we need to persuade our coalition to vote for us, and really work to spend the time to get people who don't usually vote, first-time voters. I mean, the truth of campaigns is that it can stagnate, because essentially they're looking at the voter pool and try to get people to vote from the voter pool, and not spending enough time trying to get new people to vote or exciting people to actually change. So we absolutely have to do that. But I want to say to everyone in this room, just from me personally, in my view, it's not enough to defeat Donald Trump. Obviously our democracy rests on it, so we need to do that. But we have an opportunity to defeat Trumpism. And what that means is, if he suffers a historic loss, then the Republican Party may internalize that racism, race-basing, misogyny, flouting our democracy is a bad strategy, because it will have led to a massive defeat. So in my view, it's not an either or. I think everyone here still needs to talk to your annoying cousin in Ohio and try and explain to that person why Trump has been a terrible president, has been bad on the virus. People think you can't move anybody. But let's just as a reminder, just 2 months ago, Trump was at 55% approval on the virus, and it's now 40%, 15% of people moving. People's opinions do change if you work at it. So I say 1,000% to Gaby, 1,000% that our priority needs to bring out our base. But we have an opportunity over the next 4.5 months to also reach out to those, a lot of women who voted for Trump don't want to vote for him again. A lot of people, young people, voted third party. We got to move. We have a lot of opportunities to persuade when a person who's such a disaster.
Well, Gaby,
sorry.
No. But Catherine, I'd love to answer your question about strategy.
That's where I'd like to go to strategy, and that state by state. I know that this is where your power is.
Yeah. So there's more than 7,000 state legislative seats up, right? How do you go from that down to a more manageable size to target? We have an evergreen political strategy that doesn't change year to year, although in any given year we privilege certain factors that let us take advantage of broader electoral opportunities. We're always looking for blue flips. So these are chambers that we think we can flip this, in whatever year we're in. This year, a big target for us is the Minnesota Senate. We're down just 2 seats. And going back to policing reform, the Minnesota House passed a very strong policing reform bill just last week, and the Senate, which is controlled by Republicans by just 2 seats, has vowed to block that bill and not move forward there. So that's what's at stake. That's some of what's at stake in Minnesota. We think we can also flip the Texas House. I think North Carolina is in play, Pennsylvania, both the upper and lower chambers, the Michigan House, Arizona, upper and lower chambers. So those are our blue flips. The second are blue holds. These are chambers where Democrats have a very fragile majority, and we have to hold on and not lose that. And so the Colorado Senate is in that category this year. And then the third bucket are what I call no chamber left behind. These are often badly gerrymandered chambers where we don't have a one-cycle solution, but we have to take a longer strategy, a longer view, and start investing in these places so that we can come back and flip those later. And so this year for us, that's Georgia, both the Senate and the House, Wisconsin in the Assembly for sure, and Florida. And so, we're not looking to win those chambers, we're looking to build power. And just as a reminder, in 2017, going into 2017, Virginia's House of Delegates was a no chamber left behind. right? And it took building that power in that chamber in 17 to put it into flip contention in 2019. So 2019 would never have happened if 2017 hadn't happened in that lower chamber. So we always reserve a few slots each year for that power building section, that longer term strategy where we're building power so that we can come back later and continue to build and move those into flip contention.
No, that's good. And you know, I know that when we started off, we did adopt a candidate, which what you talked about. We knew we were in a safe district and we worked in other areas to help. And I know sister district, that's what you do with volunteers. You channel them into those states that need help, making phone calls and writing postcards. So I'd like to talk about some of those, you know, some of those efforts. I know that a lot of people in Virginia, we wrote a lot of postcards. And I think with the pandemic, some of these techniques that we have to find, that's what I feel like this year, it's not the adopt a candidate program that we did, it's the voting kind of program, and just really get unique and creative about that. And I think, I know you've done postcards, Sister District does them, you've done research on that. So what are some of those tactics that maybe are coming up on your radar that you will be doing more this year because of COVID? What's your strategy to kind of pivot? We'd love to hear about that. And I know, please put it in the chat, and then we will then follow up after your response with the next poll. Robin, if you want to get that one ready.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, COVID has changed campaigning for all of us, especially at the state ledge level. These are small races with small budgets. This has been extremely hard. You know, moving everything digital has been hard. People expect to, you know, people don't expect to meet their next president in person or at a rally or something, but people do typically, you know, expect to have some contact with their next state rep or their next, you know, mayor. And so this has made things really hard for down ballot folks. Fundraising is hard. Communities are hurting financially. Donors are hurting. And, you know, I think that, and on the Republican side, it's largely been business as usual, including, you know, we're working with about 30 candidates across the country. And in a lot of places, the Republicans are going back on the doors. We don't have a single candidate anywhere in the country that's going back on the doors anytime soon, but Republicans are, and so that puts us at a disadvantage if they're out on the doors and we're not. So yeah, it's been really hard. I mean, I've been amazed by the creativity and the resilience of the grassroots communities out there to find new ways to reach voters. We've raised almost $500,000 so far for our 30 candidates, and we're just getting started this year. I mean, there's a huge enthusiasm. Our fundraising numbers for candidates, this is direct money, just direct to candidates, has been very high, higher than in any of our years before in this organization. So I'm feeling really encouraged that folks are really turned on. You had a question about postcards. Volunteers love postcards. They are not the most effective voter contact method. That's just a fact. Two-way communication is king, right? Being able to have a conversation with someone is really, really better, right? And randomized controlled trials show that. Field organizers know that. Going door to door is the best. Second best is phone banking. These other methods that are more one-way communications, like postcards, may be helpful, particularly in certain contexts. But they're no replacement for phone banking or in-person two-way communication. We've done a number of studies on postcards. We did one recently that around sending postcards for GOTV for primaries and found some really nice results there. But again, primaries are a much quieter environment. We would expect a higher effect there than in the general election, where it's very loud and there's a lot of information being thrown at voters. But you know, this year we have to do all the things, right? I'm not saying don't do postcards. I'm just saying do them with your eyes open. That you know, please add in phone banking into the mix.
Well, you know, one thing, and I know that in the channel on our team is Postcards for Virginia, and they take it to a new level because they make it into craftivism. And Robin's F. Warner, we've sent, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of thousands, and we found that it's built our networks, and building those networks, we're able to activate people, for instance, in mask making. So it has, you know, postcarding has different kind of ways that it really increases the activity to get somebody to phone bank. It increases them to be in a community. And so those networks were able to blow up and activate. And it's, building relationships for women are really important. And we found that as we're leading here, that's what postcards have done, and also the creativity around them. So, Virginia, we are wild about the postcards, but we also phone bank and coming up with great ideas. For instance, we'll be doing, because some people don't like phone banking, but now people are answering their phone now. How fun is that? So I think you're right. Every level, every strategy, nothing should be left off the table. I'll be interested to see if we're back to canvassing. I had a guy come to the door the other day and he was selling bug spray. And I thought to myself, well, if I can go to the grocery store, I should be able to vote. And if this guy comes to my door, I should be able to maybe canvass. And I'll, maybe the grassroots will make up their mind and follow their own leaders. The campaigns may be really reluctant because they may be more worried. So we'll see where that parses out. But if we want to throw up our poll, because I want to know the people in the room, our grassroots experts, I want you to weigh in and respond in the chat. And this stuff will be available later too. We'll do the summary for you. In your opinion, what is the major challenge we face in the 2020 election? And I know probably a lot of it will be voting, but I want to know what you think is the solution for this challenge, because I think a lot of the answers come from the grassroots. So while that chat's going, I would love for Neera and Gaby, last couple questions from our audience. Rosemarie, do you have any top ones that both of them, and keep your answers kind of in that 30 seconds. We have only about 7 minutes left, so I'd like to get to many questions as we can. So Rosemarie, what do you have for wonderful powerhouse women?
Well, what a powerful discussion. Thank you all. We've had a lot of conversation in the chat, a number of Q&As, a lot of questions coming around some tactical approaches about voter engagement. How do we speak to people who say they don't want to vote, say their vote doesn't matter, and also engaging people who are younger, who don't traditionally vote? Are there, and we can put it in the chat, but are there places they can go to get tactical, actionable, because we are people of action. How do we get that moving?
Who wants to take that first, Gaby or Neera?
Gaby, you want to start and then I can jump in, or?
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, just going back to what Stacey Abrams said before, when I quoted Stacey before, it is, I think, absolutely legit for folks, especially Black folks, especially people of color, to say, to have the question or feel as though voting may be inadequate. And I think that it's important to remember that voting is just one piece of this puzzle, of this civic engagement puzzle. And, just thinking about Virginia, I want to give a shout out to Tram Nguyen, right, who has done such incredible work at New Virginia Majority, and others who have been doing this work of organizing in the community for a long time. And that's important too. And, electoral work sits alongside is an allyship with movement work, right? It's not really the same thing. And, we should all kind of acknowledge that. And that's important. And so, having that connection and that allyship between electoral work and movement work can really build the case for folks who haven't seen voting matter to their communities about why they should get involved. And so I'm so inspired by Tram. I'm so inspired by others in Virginia and around the country who are organizing in their communities and making that case in the ways that matter most to specific communities.
So I'll just say one thing briefly, which is, or two things really. First, take a specific example of change that has happened. So, I use this example all the time. People organized and then voted in big numbers, and then a state that was not expanding Medicaid, Virginia, expanded Medicaid. And that expansion of Medicaid has meant 300,000 people who didn't have health care have health care today. And I would break out community numbers. How many people in this community have health care because people voted? The thing, I think the point to make is that it's a continuum, but a protest doesn't last and doesn't affect people over time unless it changes laws. And laws don't change unless you change people in positions of power. So it's important to protest, but if you don't want to protest in a year or 2 years or 3 years, you got to change the people making the decision, or you're just going to be back on the street in a year or two. Right. So that's the argument I make.
No, that's a good argument. And I know that some of us have learned where these youth hang out is this TikTok. And I saw that Trump, and I, still I see really that it's real. And from the youth, I was a little nervous. Could this be, again, another way to meddle? But that the Trump campaign, when they wanted their rally, the youth really rose up. And what I was saying to my activist friend, Barbara Jones, the other day, what I'm worried about, we have to be in those places youth are, which is TikTok, Instagram. They're not on Facebook, Yeah. And we have to reach them where they sit. But we also have to make sure that those channels aren't being used to get in their head by the wrong influencers, which are don't vote. And we've seen it already. Oh, well, with some of this, and that's concerning. But I don't know if you have any comments about being in those spaces where people run.
Well, the one thing I would say is a lot of us, and we do this because many of us are from privileged communities. When we think of young people, we think of college campuses. Should recognize a majority of young people are not on college campuses, even 18 to 22. So it really is figuring out where people are. Young people in college, and not in college are on social media, particularly TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, and other things.
Yep.
But also, real communication is very important. So it's like you have to figure out how to go into these communities with a broad coalition of people to talk to people about change in their lives.
What is, and I think it's, again, the COVID challenge. Kids, they don't even know if they're going to go back to college, right? But I know we're getting near the hour. We may run just for everybody in here, we may run a few minutes over, but we're going to wrap it up. And I just would like us to wrap it up with just briefly where people can go for Sister District to get into action with you, Gaby. And then Neera, if you have anything, last words to say to this wonderful audience. So go ahead, Gaby, and then Neera.
Sure, yes, join us, sisterdistrict.com. When you sign up, your email, your zip code will automatically route you to your closest Sister District team, who will reach out to you and get you in the loop for stuff that's happening. We have a great team in DC and Northern Virginia, and would love to have everyone join in. The DC group is currently supporting a fellow who's running for State House in Pennsylvania named John Casa, and we'll be supporting another candidate in Pennsylvania as well. Very, very important flip opportunities in Pennsylvania this year. So would love for everyone to get involved. Thank you.
And Neera.
And I'll just say, I have to flag my own organization and its information. So I would really welcome people to go to www.capaction.org. Cap Action provides information on all the battles in Congress and what you can do and how you can use your voice to engage. Criminal justice is a really important issue right now, and we'd love to ensure people are engaged. But I'll also just say, really, I wanted to end this where I started it, which is a great deal of thanks. And I'm thanking you not for what you have done, which is really important. It has the people on this Zoom have transformed Virginia, and I know that really well. What I'm thanking you, though, for is what you will do over the next 4.5 months, because everything you've done, you have to work 2 or 3 or 4 times harder. And now, in the summer, in the fall, don't wait till the last week or two. Think through how you're going to spend your last 2 weeks. Yes. How are you going to spend the last 2 weeks? Where are you going to go? Are you going to be in Virginia? Or are you going to go to Pennsylvania? Or are you going to go somewhere else? If we're going places, you need to think through what your battle plan is, because none of us want to wake up on November 4th with a reelected Trump, because our democracy will not be able to handle a second.
No,
so thank you.
I so agree. First of all, thank you to both for being here. And I'll have to, I just can't leave this call without saying this, that we are trying to plan, and that's what their strength of the women and the grassroots. We think outside the box. We don't follow the party line necessarily. That lets us run a little faster and a little quicker sometimes than maybe they're thinking. But we really feel like this year we want to flip it a little bit and start organizing our polling places now. We also usually wait to the last week to do it, but with COVID and older workers who usually manage those polls, we're like, let's turn it on its head a little bit. Let's get our volunteers thinking about polling places now, making them safe, training young volunteers, getting young people back into action. They're not in college maybe now. They don't know if they're, let's get youth writing postcards. They don't have anything to do. Maybe they're not back in school. So we're trying to reimagine and rethink. And we think the right thing to do is to get polls ready now. Make sure we are ready to go, because then not that we're not going to be doing everything, we multitask. So that's my big pitch to everybody out there. And we will be doing the recap and the questions we didn't get to. We will make sure we send those off to Gabby and Neera if they want to take a look and maybe get you an answer back. Would that be okay, Neera and Gabby?
Great.
Okay, thank you
Happy
so
to.
much.
Thanks, everybody.
While you're watching TV, Neera, so you can do that. Hope you're feeling healthy, get your strength back. And with that, I would like to say thank you, Krista and Rosemarie, and hand this over to my team. Here we are for tomorrow.
So I want to do a little bit of the wrap up here, and again say thank you to everyone for this. So badass women, oh my God, P is for politics. This was fabulous. I will be saving the chat. We will be saving the chat, so not to worry about that. We will be getting the video out for this soon. We will also be sending the summit wrap up. Please mark your calendar for what's coming up tomorrow. So we've got our nice calendar with our power lunch with Rachel Bittekoffer and Swing Left political director Ashley Blue. So that'll be really special tomorrow, and tomorrow evening also special, joining the Virginia campaign for a family-friendly economy with Senators Jennifer Boysko and Jennifer McClellan, and Shilpa Fadke from the Center for American Progress to discuss how to win essential economic rights to better protect workers, families, and especially women.
Sure. I hate to interrupt you because I know you're going to give me the side eye, but Jennifer Foy and Jennifer McCullum will both be in that session tomorrow.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
And then Paige Perriello.
Yes, that's right. I'm sorry.
You know, well, that's okay, because I'm program director. I should know these things, right? So thank you. So I didn't want to interrupt, but I know that's really important to know. All the gals will be in the room.
Yep, all the gals, the Jennifers.
Yeah, the Jennifers and everybody.
Okay, so that's wonderful. So I also put in the chat, and I will do it again now, something that you can tweet out, which is I'm at Politics of Voting, and you could be too if you had signed up for the Women's Summit, but you can still sign up now. The summit recap will be mailed out, and the YouTube channel, networknova.org/watch, networknova.org/watch. And the featured items in the fabulous Badass Boutique are the retro versions of 2018 When We Vote, We Win t-shirts. So I have on one, and I hope Robin will show hers up here. Okay, so anyone who orders that will get the first, as supplies last, we will put in a When We Vote, We Win button. And do we have a video that we're going to show after this or not? No video now? Stay safe, stay strong, stay together. Winning is the only option. 2020. Thank you all. And thank you. Here's a little thank you to our sponsors.